Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this February 19th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening on First Amendment Radio at 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., that's Pacific time, or at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And if you can't listen to either show, go to my website at arcticbeacon.com. Today I'd like to finish up what I started a couple days ago. This will be a part 3 show talking about the connection between Georgetown University's Fr Edmund Walsh, who began the School of Foreign Service, where most of our diplomats are still trained in the Jesuitical method, and then move on a little bit. We showed you in the past 2 shows, so go to them, the connections between him and Stalin, some of his adventures going to Baghdad, also him being the overseer of the trial at Nuremberg. Doesn't sound like just a school teacher to me. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about his connections to Eisenhower and MacArthur and why Ike may have been picked. I think it was because he was easily controllable, because there are many, many other men in the military more qualified for the position. So let's look back a little bit at Dwight D. Eisenhower. And many of you probably weren't even born when he was president and probably know very little about him. You know he was the commander, the head of our armed forces in World War II, and then became president of the United States. Now, he was born the third of 7 sons in Denison, Texas, to David Jacob Eisenhower and Ida Elizabeth Stover. His father was an engineer, while his mother was a devoted follower and supporter of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, Jehovah's Witnesses. The family home served as a local meeting hall for the group from 1896 to 1915. The constant regular exposure of Eisenhower to the end of the world imagery mixed with Bible prophecy by the Jehovah's Witnesses had a profound impact on him throughout his life. While he was never a gifted student, nor known for his intellect, his fascination in occult and religious power placed him more than once amidst powerful men who assisted his career. Interesting. Dwight graduated from high school around 1909 at the age of 19. He then took a night shift laboring job at the Bell Springs Creamery. In 1911, Eisenhower attempted to apply to the Naval Academy, but failed the basic entrance exam. In later years, his record was changed to claim he passed, but was somehow ineligible on account of his age, even though he qualified under the age limit at the time. Later that year, in 1911, powerful U.S. Senator from Kansas, Joseph L. Bristow, used his influence to get Eisenhower into the West Point Military Academy. Now, the reason I'm bringing Ike up is that if you go to his website today, you'll find a page dedicated to Fr Edmund Walsh, and that's when Edmund Walsh died. And also they had a big, huge ceremony in the White House lawn regarding his death. So it's quite interesting. Why would they do that if he's just a simple professor? Now, Dwight graduated from high school around 1909 at the age of 19. He then took a night shift laboring job at the Bell Springs Creamery. Okay, I think I just said that, didn't I? Okay. Let's move on here. I got a little sidetracked. The motivation... Well, remember Bristow, the U.S. Senator, put him in West Point? The motivation for this act and how he came to know Eisenhower has never been properly explained. At West Point, Eisenhower again showed mediocre academic skills, but managed to scrape through and graduate. Unlike most of his fellow graduates, Eisenhower never saw action in World War I. He never did. And he had desk jobs all the way up until he became the head of command in World War II. That's quite interesting. Never seeing any action or any combat, but then ordering combat troops to their death, perhaps. Instead, he spent his first few years with the National Guard and then assigned to various new tank corps where he met General Fox Connor. He had the dubious honor of having his temporary rank of major being revoked and being demoted back to captain in 1922. While General Connor was appointed Camp Gallard, Panama, and the Panama Canal Zone, he made Eisenhower his executive officer, a role he held from 1922 to 1924. It was under the guidance of General Connor that Eisenhower found a grounding in essential military strategy and politics. After finishing his term with Connor, Eisenhower was promoted again to major and attended the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. His career then stagnated for 5 years until 1929. He was appointed executive assistant to General George Moseley, then Secretary of War. Moseley was Secretary of War. In 1933, he was then appointed chief military aide to General Douglas MacArthur and accompanied him to the Philippines. It was through MacArthur and Eisenhower that came to the attention of the all-powerful Jesuit Fr Edmund Walsh. MacArthur was educated by Jesuits, and Walsh was his influential patron. Eisenhower quickly became an even more deeply devoted fan of Father Walsh in his geopolitical mind. So who's really controlling this stuff? It looks like Father Walsh. That's why I call Georgetown White House number 2. Except, they don't get elected. I guess that's what we call the shadow government, right? But how come when you go to the internet, you never hear the Jesuits mentioned? Oh, you hear a few words here and there. But it's interesting. Look at what he's done here. He has trained MacArthur. He then is close to Eisenhower, who becomes the head of command, and Eisenhower goes to him for advice. At the outbreak of World War II in 1939, Eisenhower returned from the Philippines at 49 years old, but a lieutenant colonel. By June 41, 6 months before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, Colonel Eisenhower was appointed to the War Department General Staff in D.C. and to a role of holding the temporary rank of Brigadier General. Whatever his role in the events leading up to Pearl Harbor, he soon held favor with President Franklin D. Roosevelt, another staunch supporter of Fr Edmund Walsh. Do you ever hear the connection between Roosevelt and Walsh? No. In December 43, Roosevelt announced Eisenhower, still then only officially holding the rank of colonel, would be the supreme Allied commander in Europe, being promoted immediately to being a 4-star major general. So he goes from colonel to 4-star major general, one of the most dramatic rises in promotions in American military history. Now, could Walsh have something to do with that? The announcement sent shockwaves then through the U.S. and even the Allied forces, as Eisenhower was promoted over the heads of over 50 seasoned military leaders, including his former friend and mentor MacArthur, all of whom had a far greater skill and merit. I think, folks, it's because Walsh could control him, and MacArthur behind the scenes could get more done. Upon his arrival in England in 43, a controversial claim has been made that Eisenhower received a communique from senior members of the SS offering clear and specific terms of unconditional surrender of all German forces, including the assassination of Hitler if the Americans would help halt the Soviet advance into Central Europe. Whether true or false, there is no question that Eisenhower quickly shelved the Churchill plan of the 43 invasion while the Nazi forces were in the state of disarray and allowed the Germans, now catch this, a full 6 months to rearm and re-equip their French forces ahead of any invasion. So, look at Ike's taking lessons from Walsh. They want to keep the war going, so what do? Delay things. Sounds like Vietnam a little bit too, doesn't it? In 1944, Eisenhower was confirmed as a 5-star general and chief of the army. In spite of the massive logistical superiority of the Allied forces, the Eisenhower D-Day plan very nearly failed. Again, during the Battle of the Bulge, Eisenhower inexplicably ordered the halt of the encirclement of German forces, enabling up to 150,000 to escape and prolong the war a further 12 months. Sounds like Jesuit influence to me. Keep that war going. We got to kill more people. It's not time to end it. No rational military or political explanation for this order has ever been given. The effect of Eisenhower's deliberate decisions to prolong the war cost an additional 100,000 Allied personnel lives and effectively handed Eastern Europe to the Soviet Union. Oh, just like the plan they wanted, because they were always thinking ahead now to the Cold War. One man that did know the truth was General George Smith Patton. On December 9th, 1945, the day before he was due to fly back to Washington to meet President Truman, with proof that Eisenhower was a traitor who had cost the lives of thousands of American soldiers and millions of civilians, he was seriously injured in a road accident near Mannheim, Germany on 9 December 1945, dying in the hospital 21 December 1945. Now, let's just think about this. Remember the movie Patton? They made him out to be this guy who thought he was Caesar or something, right? Made him out to be a little bit crazy. Well, in fact, I think Patton had the goods on Ike. And I think there's a good possibility that his death was very, very strange. And who caused the accident? And why did he die in the hospital? Now, I can't categorically say it wasn't a real accident, but the timing seems a bit suspicious, doesn't it? One day before he's going to meet Truman with information about what's really going on. Well, the actions of Eisenhower. Okay, so let's go back here. Miraculously, the other occupants of the car, in which Patton was critically injured, escaped unharmed. To counter the claims and rumor mills, Eisenhower authorized the leak of stories to damage the character of Patton, including blaming Patton for the escape of the 150,000 soldiers of the German army, and that Patton was mentally unstable. And folks, that's how he was characterized in the movie. I think George C. Scott played Patton. These false rumors still persist today. However, there can be no doubt about the direct orders of Eisenhower and Operation Keelhaul. Look it up. The repatriation of over 2 million former Russians, prisoners of war, back to Joseph Stalin. While the actions of Eisenhower have always been maintained as a fact of life following the Yalta Agreement between Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt, the manner and clear fate of these poor souls was nothing short of genocide on the same level as Adolf Hitler and the SS. Eisenhower deliberately used the same logistical infrastructure of the Nazis they used to murder millions to transport the millions of Russian prisoners of war to concentration camps until they could be handed over to the Soviets for mass execution. During this time, tens of thousands died from malnourishment, from ill treatment, and sickness at the hands of Eisenhower's special units in charge of the operation. Many simply died in the same manner as the Jewish victims who had also been carted like sardines in the same train carriages years before. Following the end of the war, Eisenhower was appointed military governor of the U.S. occupation zone. He was instrumental in dismantling key evidence of the live human sacrifice of millions via the ovens at concentration camps. Eisenhower also played a crucial role in eliminating as much evidence as possible concerning the direct role of the Catholic Church and the Jesuits in World War II. He was rewarded in being made a Knight of Malta by the Vatican. Interesting. In 1953, Ike won the presidency of the United States in a landslide, along with his young Vice President Richard Nixon. This president was notable for the closeness the world came to nuclear war. The original and official standard of the United States was changed under his presidency to, In God We Trust, a direct and deliberate heresy against the fundamental tenets of the Declaration of Independence, some say, that sought the United States to be a secular society. Now, many may disagree. Some may like the fact that he did that. But, in America, we always have we have to realize that whatever Ike did in this particular case, if he's following what Edmund Walsh is doing, when he meant In God We Trust, what God did he really mean? is my question. So, let's go. Now, Ike. Many people don't even know much about Ike anymore. In fact, he's looked at as this kind of nice old man who ran World War II, got the victory, and then became a president. And where did it all begin? Man, he was a colonel, became a 4-star general. He knew Edmund Walsh. And they could do whatever they want with Ike. Maybe that was their plan in the beginning, and maybe there's a lot more there that we'll never know. But I know one thing. This war, like others, was orchestrated. Now, what about Delano Roosevelt? Franklin Delano Roosevelt. We all know the New Deal. We always see him in his wheelchair and all of these things. Let's talk a little bit about him, so we know just a little bit more, refresh your memory about who he was, because I bet you not many people remember him either. Not many of us were even born when he was president, right? So can you imagine the younger generation? He's as far in their memory as, I bet you that many people don't even remember what year he was a president, if you went and asked the question. But he was born in Hyde Park, in the old Dutch colonial enclave in Hudson Valley, New York, U.S., as the only child to James Roosevelt and Sarah Ann Delano, of ancient Dutch and French ancestry, respectively. James Roosevelt was wealthy and a powerful member of the New York aristocracy. Well, nothing's changed, folks. You know, this idea that anybody can become president of the United States, look at who's running today. I mean, it's ridiculous. You got a guy that's a billionaire. No, he's a billionaire. And then another guy named Bloomberg, he's a trillionaire. He wants to get in the office. He wants to maybe run because he's not happy with the billionaire. So we're going to have a trillionaire. So isn't it your connections, your bloodlines that really tell you who's going to be the king in the United States? We might as well just call him that, because that's basically what it is. The king and his court of jolly men in the U.S. Congress and Senate. It's turned out to be a real interesting situation, hasn't it, in America? But anyway, James Roosevelt was a wealthy and powerful member of New York, and whose business interests were primarily in coal and transportation. He was vice president of the Delaware and Hudson Railway and president of the Southern Railway Security Company. The Roosevelt clan migrated from the Netherlands to New Amsterdam, later New York City, and towards the end of the 17th century, gradually growing in political, financial, and social influence. A regular blue blood there, right? So anyway, both Franklin D. Roosevelt and President Theodore Teddy Roosevelt shared the same common ancestry back to Nicholas Roosevelt, 1658 to 1742, one of the children of Klaas Martensen van Roosevelt, the immigrant ancestor of the Roosevelt family. Franklin attended Groton School in Massachusetts and then Harvard. While in Harvard, his first cousin, Theodore Roosevelt, became president, and he became the role model of hero Franklin. At Harvard, he met his fifth cousin, Anna Elena Eleanor Roosevelt, and the two married in March 1905. President Theodore Roosevelt stood in at the wedding for Eleanor's deceased father, Elliot. The couple had 6 children: Anna Eleanor, James, Franklin Delano Jr., Elliot, and the second Franklin Delano Jr., and John Aspinwall. In 1905, he entered Columbia Law School, but dropped out, never to graduate, 2 years later in 1907. Okay. Given he had already passed the New York State Bar exam, Franklin took a job with the prestigious Wall Street law firm of Carter, Ledyard, and Milburn in 1908. 1911, Roosevelt was elected to the New York State Senate, re-elected for the second term in 1912. He resigned from the New York State Senate on March 17th 1913, taking up a position as Assistant Secretary of the Navy to Josephus Daniels in the Woodrow Wilson administration. An Assistant Secretary, Roosevelt expanded the Navy, including founding the United States Naval Reserve. So, next time you go to some place and you're talking, you can talk about all the things you know about Roosevelt. We're going to get to some of the more interesting ones as we move along. But it's good to get a real background for all these people, isn't it? To know exactly where they came from, what they were doing. He was also active in a number of imperialist military actions by the United States, including using the Navy and Marines to intervene in several Central American and Caribbean countries. In 1915, Roosevelt had a significant part in the Constitution imposed on the people of Haiti by the United States. An enthusiast of the partnership of selected industry and finance houses in the funding and building of new U.S. weapons. Roosevelt was instrumental in establishing the U.S. submarine fleet. In 1918, he visited England and France and met with Winston Churchill for the first time. At the end of the war, Roosevelt was charged with demobilizing naval assets, a role he opposed and succeeded in watering down. In 1920, he resigned as Assistant Secretary, now we're talking about what, World War I, to the Navy to run as vice presidential candidate with Governor James M. Cox of Ohio on the Democratic presidential ticket. He was soundly defeated and returned to legal practice. In 1928, he was elected governor of New York, forming an unholy alliance with the Catholic Irish power base of Tammany Society. Okay, so here we go with him. In 1932, let's see here. In 1932, Roosevelt secured the Democratic presidential nomination and, formed a powerful team around himself, including Joseph Kennedy, William Randolph Hearst, the former first chairman of the Federal Reserve, William Gibbs McAdoo, and Jesuit Father Edmund Walsh. There he comes again. At the election that year, Roosevelt won in a landslide. Outgoing President Hoover requested that Roosevelt join forces to stop the spiraling financial banking crisis crippling American business. Many of the key advisors of Roosevelt were the same bankers, lawyers, and businessmen who would help start the financial crisis in the first place. Create the problem, then solve it, so you benefit. Roosevelt refused, and America virtually ground to a halt in the final months of the Hoover presidency as a result, causing greater hardship to millions. A month before his inauguration in February 1933, Roosevelt, did you know this? He almost escaped an assassination attempt. I don't know who's trying to kill him, but I just wanted to bring that up. Now, his inauguration in 1933 coincided with the bleakest financial and living conditions in America since Jamestown. Immediately, this is where it gets interesting, he unleashed a record number of bills. So they bring America to its knees with this Great Depression, and now we're going to find out exactly what Roosevelt's going to do. And he's going to come across as a hero, but I don't really think so. But anyway, because they created the problem to begin with. And it didn't have to be that way, did it? But as they say, a lot of people really benefit from a depression. And usually it's those rich guys in banks and those guys up there that know what's going on. But anyway, it wasn't the guys jumping out of buildings when they lost all their money. Or it isn't the people today that have lost all their benefits for, all their retirement benefits, etc. Back in 3 minutes for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of our last show this week on the Investigative Journal on this February 19th, 2016 day on our calendar. And I'm going through a long and exhaustive factual history of Roosevelt, his life, and putting things together in kind of a nutshell here for you. So bear with me. The reason I do it is because behind the scenes we have this guy Edmund Walsh. And apparently a lot of our politicians back then take advice from Georgetown and the people there, especially Walsh. And we explained why and who he was in other shows. However, I suggest the same thing goes on today. And you're going to find more people connected to the Jesuits in our politics, in our high offices, than you ever did back with Roosevelt. So it's worse. Now, back in the 70s and 80s, we went through how many people beholden to the Jesuit order and the Vatican are in high positions in our government, controlling many of our committees in the Senate and the House. Today it's no different, and in fact there's more. But anyway, let's go back to 1933, because this shows that history does repeat itself. And the reason is we don't get the right history. And the reason it's always going to be this way is because they tell you what they want, so they can just keep repeating the same problems and benefiting from them. His inauguration in 1933 coincided with the bleakest financial and living conditions in America, like I said. Roosevelt immediately, though, unleashed a record number of bills, all of which passed Congress and the Senate easily. It cannot be denied that the sheer amount of detailed new laws implemented by Roosevelt in his first 100 days point to a well-coordinated and funded plan that must have been in operation at least 14 to 18 months prior to his election. Sounds like the same thing, 9/11, they wrote the Patriot Act before 9/11. And it was written by a Jesuit lawyer named Vin Dim at Georgetown. They have a lot to do with our government, don't they? The amount of change is astounding and unprecedented in American 20th century history. In the first 100 days, now listen to this, Roosevelt had his team plus instituted the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, which eventually hired 250,000 unemployed on low wages for government infrastructure work and assisting in the building of infrastructure for large private enterprises, plus expanded the powers of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, enabling large corporations such as railroad, arms manufacturers, oil, and mining companies to get cheap government loans. This helped accelerate the arms manufacturing industry and help offset major American multinational investment in the building of the arms industry of Nazi Germany, plus set up the Agricultural Adjustment Administration to subsidize the largest food manufacturing companies with major land holdings by subsidizing their profits and increasing the prices for essential food and staples as they were paid to abandon productive land and reduce livestock. This had the effect of driving. What did it have the effect? Just guess. I think you know what's coming up. It had the effect of driving many small and medium farmers out of business, who could no longer compete with large food producers, increasing the suffering of the American people, plus introducing the National Industry Recovery Act. This guy was big government, which suspended antitrust laws, effectively remonopolizing key markets to big business, and he's a Democrat, shutting down fair competition under the excuse that price stability of large monolithic corporations holding control of whole markets was better than the uncertainty of the market-driven economy. The U.S. Supreme Court found this particular law unconstitutional in 1935, but the decision was ignored by Roosevelt. Of course, executive order, plus introduced new banking regulations, including the setup of the Securities and Exchange Commission to regulate Wall Street and make it harder for new companies to raise public capital. It started the following year, and close friend and presidential fundraiser Joseph P. Kennedy in charge. Joseph P. Kennedy, the bootlegger. That's how they made their money. And I think they still get $1 for every bottle of scotch coming from Europe, or Scotland, or Ireland, or somewhere. Yeah, but plus amended the Volstead Act, prohibition, with the Cullen-Harrison Act allowing the sale of alcohol once again across America, but this time with heavy federal regulation and federal taxes. Wow. It's kind of the beginning of what's going on today, right? Unleashed the unprecedented public spending on public works, such as new energy plants for industry, new roads for the sale and use of motor vehicles, and new rail for the commercial freight, plus sent the United States into bankruptcy on account of these massive government subsidies to major U.S. corporations and the unemployed. In turn, Roosevelt turned to his friend and advisor William Gibbs McAdoo and the Jesuit-controlled banks holding effectively majority of the U.S. Federal Reserve to loan the United States massive loans in order, they've now gotten rid of the gold standard, right? Starting the Federal Reserve and the fiat money. And this is exactly what they do today. They just print when they want, loan it to the government, then these rich bankers get interest on top of that, and then people get the burden. So they make massive loans in order to underwrite the printing of more currency. Plus, they confiscated all privately held gold held by the U.S. citizens under Executive Order 6102, handing it over to the U.S. Treasury, and then in turn handed it back to the privately owned financial cartels, the U.S. Federal Reserve. So this guy, my friends, all of this stuff, you don't hear about Roosevelt. He's the guy sitting in his chair with his cigarette and a cigarette holder, talking about how he did it. Do you think he knew about Pearl Harbor? Many people have researched that, and I think it was an orchestrated event as well, the igniter of that war. Now, so he confiscates all the gold under Executive Order 6102, hands it to the Treasury, then gives it to the Federal Reserve, his banker friends. Roosevelt claimed this was necessary to ensure the security of the massive loans to the private Jesuit banking cartel. The single act represents the greatest theft of private property in U.S. history and comparable to the scale of the communist theft of private property after 1917. Americans would not be allowed to hold gold again until 1974. In contrast to this massive amount of change inflicted upon the American people by Roosevelt, upon assuming office, he steadfastly refused to support global plans that would have brought the global economic crisis to a swift end. At the London Economic Conference of 1933, attended by representatives of 66 nations, all eyes and hope were on Roosevelt. Instead of supporting pragmatic economic measures, including the strengthening of the gold standard, Roosevelt did the complete opposite, effectively destroying the international currency and monetary system overnight through the Emergency Banking Act of 1993, banning gold exports. So they're hoarding all the gold. The actions of Roosevelt had the immediate effect of drying. That's what these old dictators used to do, didn't they? It's no different here. The actions of Roosevelt had the immediate effect of drying up the last remaining liquidity capital in the global markets and forcing the United States to borrow large sums of money from private bankers, owning the U.S. Federal Reserve, economic decisions that defy a logical explanation to this day. If nothing else, the decision by Roosevelt in 1933 to deliberately and consciously destroy global liquidity markets in the midst of the global liquidity crisis remains one of the greatest acts of economic terrorism of the 20th century and directly contributed to the deaths of millions through starvation, including wars that ensued less than 7 years later. Wasn't that their plan? See what I'm talking about? By the start of 1935, American large corporations favored under Roosevelt were making unprecedented profits both in the U.S. and abroad, especially in Nazi Germany under Hitler. The motor companies Ford and General Motors alone made enormous sums in establishing manufacturing plants by building tanks and military transport vehicles, later used to kill American soldiers in World War II. So Roosevelt's a good guy, isn't he? Standard Oil made huge sums in providing fuel for the Third Reich, as well as specializing aircraft oils vital to maintain the operation of the aircraft. Even during World War II, when these same planes were used to destroy American fighters and bombers and ships. One of the most successful new companies under this new era of capitalism was the company formerly called International Business Machine Corporations, known today as IBM. They supplied the first commercial computing services to the Nazis and Heinrich Himmler in order to process names, addresses, and personal details of tens of millions of people to be either rounded up for elimination or allowed to live. Without U.S. innovation by U.S. companies, the Holocaust simply logistically would have been impossible. However, Roosevelt had a major problem in having any chance of winning re-election. While big business had been making ever-increasing profits, the conditions of the average Americans had barely improved, with over 20% still unemployed. With just a few months out from the election, in a desperate move, Roosevelt launched the Social Security Act, promising for the first time to provide support to the elderly, the poor, and the sick. At the same time, Roosevelt launched the National Labor Relations Act, guaranteeing unions' right to collectively bargain in the workplace and strike. These two new laws had the effect of turning around his support, and Roosevelt was reelected for another term starting in 1936. Safely reelected now, Roosevelt began transforming the United States to a fully fledged fiat currency based on the ability to extract taxes from its citizens. New higher income tax standards were not introduced until the wartime conditions of World War II. In 1936 and 37, his proposed tax on corporate savings were rejected. However, Roosevelt succeeded in nationalizing and increasing new payroll taxes, which had the effect of dramatically driving unemployment up from 14% to 19% by 1938. In 1939, when Hitler invaded Germany and England declared war, Roosevelt ensured that the United States remained neutral. For one thing, much of the Nazi war machine had been manufactured and financed by American multinational corporations. Now, he only came into the war when they staged Pearl Harbor. He knew about it. And he was told to lay off, even when American intelligence agencies, or even when they had perfect information that the Nazis were killing Jews in a horrendous manner, which should be enough for us to step in, but they had to keep this war going, keep it going, and then move in at the very end after the atrocities have been taking place. So there's your story on President Franklin Roosevelt, things you never heard about him. You notice I didn't talk much about the wartime. That's what they talk about with him. They don't talk about the rest of the stuff he did to ruin the economy, in a sense, to take us off the gold standard. It just goes on and on. And behind the scenes, we have the famous Jesuit order, Father Edmund Walsh, and their strategy of tension going on all around the world now. Now, we talked a lot about these people. And we mentioned so many of them that you kind of get confused sometimes, don't you? We mentioned, we started out with Walsh. Then we go to Vladimir Ledikowski, who was the Jesuit general at the time in Poland. And it's interesting, he was stationed right there, and that's where they really came in. Do you think he was really supportive of the Jews? I don't think so. And then we went and talked about the connections between all these people and Stalin, and then the connections between Roosevelt, and the connections of Walsh between Eisenhower, and then we know the Vatican connection to Hitler that we've done many, many times. And of course, Churchill is right in there with the boys. We haven't done much on him, and probably should. But the idea that if you start reading this information, you start wondering, could it really be true that they can orchestrate these wars? Now, there are many, many people in America who would think that is a conspiracy theory to the ultimate. And they'll say, no, it's always one country fighting the other for their rights and all that. But could it be, when you look at all this behind-the-scenes stuff that never gets talked about, couldn't you easily make the case that they are orchestrated? And when you really start thinking about it factually, it makes more sense than just these coincidences. All these wars just keep happening one after the other. It just doesn't add up. But most people aren't going to take the time. They're just going to read what they're told. They're going to listen to who they're told, and they're going to say, "Oh, what importance was it back then?" Well, then you'll get the same person to say, if we shouldn't make the same mistakes that history made in the past. Well, you're going to if you don't start looking a little bit deeper. Now, what happened here? What are all the little things going on? What could we do? But there was a lot of violence and political revolution in 1917 and 18 that the Catholic Church did, under the control of the Jesuits, did fund, organize, and execute the political upheaval resulting in the February Revolution of Russia and the overthrow of Tsar Nicholas II. Think about it. Could they have also arranged the safe passage of Lenin back then and other exiled revolutionaries from Switzerland across the battle lines when they were first starting the Bolshevik revolutions of World War I on a train flying from the official colors of the Pope and the Vatican? They did that in the Vatican rat lines with the Nazis. That the motive for returning Lenin to the new government was the inability of Stalin at that particular juncture to gain sufficient control over factions amongst the revolutionaries at that time. So they had to keep Lenin involved, and then they end up killing him. Now, was it possible back then that through the Jesuit order they did incite violence and riots across Russia? Communities in which over 60,000 Jews were killed in 530 Russian communities after political religious uprising erupts, aiming to strike at the bourgeoisie and the Jews? Could they be doing the same thing today with terrorism? That's a good question, isn't it? If they were doing it back then they could be doing it today. But you know what? I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And the people that are always, most of the people that listen to this aren't going to agree. I'm going to give you the benefit of that doubt. My only question to you is, why isn't it at least put on the table when all of this stuff makes sense and these facts are there? And even that Walsh was brokering these deals. And he then controlled, he had a lot to do with Eisenhower and controlled a lot at the Nuremberg trials. Shouldn't we be looking at this at least? But no, it's covered up. And you know what? Right now they're going to call it hate speech. Just to keep you quiet. Now, of publishing a false statement for the purpose of concealing. Now let's see what they could be. Okay, could the Vatican and the Jesuit order be from 1900 to present day that the Vatican, more specifically the Jesuit order, has maintained countless false statements and documents pertaining to the status of Joseph Stalin. That, in fact, Father Joseph Stalin was a Jesuit priest, trained, dedicated, and fully ordained of the Jesuit order, who was recruited for a historic mission in his final year at the seminary in Tiflis in Germany, or in Russia in 1899. Then, in addition to failing to recognize Stalin's as a Jesuit priest, furthermore, that the Jesuit order did permit Stalin to marry not only once, but twice, while remaining a fully ordained priest. That for his entire life until his death, there is no indication that, let's just call him Father Joseph Stalin, was ever defrocked as a priest, or ever called a heretic. Now, could it be possible in 1924 that Vladimir Ledikowski, the Jesuit general, did order Father Joseph Stalin to murder the leader of the communist Russia at the time, aged 53, Stalin, or Lenin? That Stalin did act to protect his position and mission as General Secretary of the Communist Party upon the insistence of Lenin that he be removed. That not only did Stalin have Lenin poisoned, but that he did spread rumors upon his ascendancy to absolute power, that Lenin has been mentally unwell for the last few years of his reign and even died from syphilis. Now you remember how they do the same thing over and over again. Remember how when Patton was going to spill the beans maybe on Eisenhower, how he was in an accident, killed, he died a few days later in the hospital, and then they started to put out information that he was a little bit mentally unwell. Is the same tactics, different country. And where did they learn this stuff from? I think Walsh had a lot to do with it. Now, in 1919, an important means for Ledikowski was the 1919 establishment of the School of Foreign Service. Under Edmund Walsh at Georgetown, the Jesuit-run institution so influential in U.S. government, established in 1789. Now, the reason that it's just so interesting to me that we don't want to connect the dots, even though it's right out here. Now, is it true that I call him the Grand Inquisitor, a mass murderer, Stalin, a Roman Catholic, was he loyal to the Pope? Now, who ordered the famine in the Ukraine? It was the Society of Jesus. Who trained Joseph Stalin? Ask that. Was it the Jesuits? Yes. Who funded the Russian communism? The West, through the Jesuits. The mission control number 2 of the Soviet Military Order of Malta, namely New York. It was the Order of Malta who controlled Wall Street, which, by the way, is riddled with Malta controlled British intelligence, such as the one group called the Blackstone Group, still to this day. Who created the Russian Revolution in 1917? The Society of Jesus. Could they have? They then bought about a secret concordat with the Pope, Lenin, and Stalin at a certain time. You should also be aware of the Polish Roman Catholic Edmund Dushinsky, who was controlled by the Jesuit order. You should then note his son Felix Dushinsky, a Roman Catholic, also highly admired by the General Order. Now, what was Felix? He was the head of the Cheka and main man of Joseph Stalin. Why did the Bolsheviks or even Stalin why didn't the Bolsheviks or Stalin expel Malta from Moscow, the Knights of Malta from Moscow? Now, what happened 5 years? There was a civil war. The Jesuits were allowed officially back with Russia by Lenin. Funny, that wasn't it. They were in Moscow exactly when the revolution started. Funny, that wasn't it. That the Jesuit General Ladikowski sent one of his Jesuit soldiers to the USSR. This was the powerful Georgetown University Father Edmund Walsh, remember? And it was Edmund Walsh who put Stalin as the secretary of the Communist Party. Notice how the Knights of Malta, Papal Knight William J. Casey, helped finance the Soviets via Kama River Truck Factory. This is all little information you get from all these researchers who are doing a good job. But most people say it's all conspiracy theory. None of this stuff could exist, not in our country, because we have freedom of the press. We have freedom of religion. We are not like those in Russia. Folks, we do the same exact thing, just with a little bit more deceit, a little bit more, I call it we're a good advertising group. We know how to advertise capitalism. We know how to advertise freedom. We know how to advertise it better than anybody else. Put out those really slick ads, and nobody will look deep into really what's going on. That's our goal. You can tell anybody you want. We're the greatest country in the world. All this kind of garbage. And we tell people that in all of our advertising, all of our Hollywood movies, all the stuff that gets gleaned from the victors, the people who are in control, your owners, the Jesuit order, the Vatican, the rest of these people working for them, the United States government, the Congress, the Senate, and you think you are going to get a fair election this year. I think, folks, it's a waste of time to vote. You ought to let people know that it doesn't matter who you vote for. And if you look at these people, the choice is, it's ridiculous. They're all actors. They're all there for a purpose to move this New World Order train one step closer to a New World Order and a one world religion. We'll end a note on that this weekend. Have a good evening, and see you Monday on the Investigative Journal.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.